surprise shone light from distant northern skies. At that point, I realized I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's okay. This is all an illusion, and I'm willing to play.
Welcome to the Quantum Guide Show, interviews with awakened masters as they share their quantum work with you. The Quantum Guide Show is produced by Karen Holton, creator of the 9 Steps to Quantum Health Transformation, a free 9-step online course to give you the tips and resources you need to thrive. Karen lost and continues to keep off 178 pounds of surplus body weight as she made her dreams come true. Whether you are awakening to the ascension process or simply want a wiser, more efficient lifestyle, this program is for you. No strings attached. The Quantum Guide Show is brought to you in part by Zendome's Orgonite, Karen's unique brand of orgone generators, ethically sourced, handmade, and double charged for maximum effect. Find out how orgone generators work and what they can do for you. Don't be fooled by imitations. Check out Karen's current selection, only available from her website, KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Quantum Health Transformation. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Quantum Guide Show. Today in episode 53, I am very pleased to introduce you to Kevin Annett, author of Murder by Decree. But first, for context, I want to share with you a bit about Kevin's background. Kevin was born in Edmonton in 1956, and he was adopted by the Anishinaabe indigenous nation in Winnipeg in 2004 and given the name Eagle Strong Voice. He was educated at the University of British Columbia and holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology, 1983, and master's degrees in political science, 1986, and divinity in 1990. Kevin was ordained as a minister of the United Church of Canada in May 1990, held positions in Manitoba and downtown Toronto. Later, he was hired as minister of St. Andrew's United Church in Port Alberni, July 1992. He expanded his congregation from 10 members to nearly 100 by 1993. But Kevin was fired without cause, notice, or review by United Church officials on January 23, 1995, after exposing the murder of children at his church's Alberni Indian Residential School and his church's theft of Ahusat Native land. Kevin was subsequently expelled from ministry without due process, lost his wife and children in a church-funded divorce, and was smeared and blacklisted by a joint church and RCMP Black Ops campaign that continues to the present. Kevin convened the first human rights tribunal into crimes in Canadian Indian residential schools in 1998. It was held in Vancouver and was co-hosted by the UN affiliate IHRAAM. Based on the evidence revealed, the tribunal recommended to the United Nations that Canada and its churches be charged with genocide. Under Canadian pressure, the UN refused to act. Kevin formed the first permanent inquiry into these crimes. The Truth Commission into Genocide in Canada, held in February 2000, and wrote the first independent report on genocide in Canada in January 2001 called Hidden from History, the Canadian Holocaust. Kevin commenced a nationwide campaign to document residential school crimes and organize the survivors. between 2002 and 2005. He helped form the nationwide Friends and Relatives of the Disappeared, also known as the FRD, on the first Aboriginal Holocaust Remembrance Day, April 15th, 2005 in Vancouver. He then launched public protests and occupations against the Canadian government and the Catholic, Anglican, and United Churches in Vancouver, Winnipeg, and Toronto. Kevin released a documentary film called Unrepentant in February of 2007, which documents the uncensored record and evidence of deliberate genocide by Canadian church and state in the Indian residential schools. That same month, the Globe and Mail confirmed Kevin's claims of a 50% death rate in these schools. Children died in droves despite warnings to Ottawa. Member of Parliament Gary Morasti watched Unrepentant and called in the House of Commons for missing children investigation. Kevin published a list of 22 mass graves of children at former residential schools and held mass occupations of the 3 guilty churches throughout the spring of 2008. The government buckled. Kevin and the FRD forced the official apology for Indian residential schools from the Harper government back in July of 2008. But Kevin is subsequently erased from any media reports, despite his official vindication and the validation of his claims about massive death rates and genocidal crimes in residential schools. After being invited by church survivors to Europe, Kevin held a public protest and exorcism of the Vatican, October 11th, 2009. The next morning, a tornado strikes Rome, and First News reports appear linking Pope Benedict with child torture. Kevin was invited by church survivors in Ireland to form the International Tribunal of Crimes of Church and State, known as the ITCCS, in June of 2010, and he was appointed its first secretary. The ITCCS spread to 9 countries and launched protests and legal actions against the Catholic and other genocidal churches. Kevin was invited by 9 traditional Mohawk elders in Brantford, Ontario, to excavate at a mass grave of children at the local Anglican school in February of 2011. The dig commenced that fall with the elders' approval. Children's bones are uncovered and positively identified by forensic scientists in November of 2011. Then the dig was shut down in January of 2012 by government allied chiefs, and a false story smearing Kevin was circulated by them. The International Common Law Court of Justice, the ICLCJ, was convened by the ITCCS to charge Pope Benedict, Queen Elizabeth, and 28 other defendants with committing and concealing genocide in July of 2012. Kevin served as the chief advisor to the prosecutor. Pope Benedict, who is Joseph Ratzinger, resigned from his office just before the ICLCI verdict found him guilty and sentenced to arrest and imprisonment in February 2013. And after the Spanish government notified Benedict that he could face arrest based on the ICLCJ evidence, 3 other top Vatican officials named in the ICLCJ indictment also resigned. Based on his work, Kevin was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by American scholars in 2014 and 2015. In 2016, he received the coveted Prague Peace Award. In January 2015, Kevin helped convene the first assembly of the Republic of Canada in Winnipeg. The same month, he began a public radio program, Radio Free Canada, which became Here We Stand. Between 2016 and 2019, Kevin published 10 books recounting the history of his campaigns, the evidence of ongoing genocide in Canada, the case for the Republic of Canada, his biographies, and common law and whistleblower training manuals. And this can be found at his website, www.murderbydecree.com, and all the links will be in the description below. Kevin was appointed the national co-convener for the Republic of Canada in January of 2017. And as part of the national resistance to the COVID police state between February and November 2020, Kevin personally organized 11 common law Republic assemblies on the West Coast, and he assisted with the formation of over 30 other assemblies across Canada. The First National Constitutional Convention for the Republic was set for April 15th to 18th. Welcome, Kevin. How are you doing today?
I'm just doing fine. Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. This is really important information, and it's somehow suppressed left, right, and center. And I think it's important for people to find out. Before we get started, is there anything that you would like to add to the information I just presented to the viewers?
No, that's pretty thorough. That's a very necessary history to know, because in this culture, about every 5 minutes, history is erased. And they have the technology now to do that very effectively. So people have to know that it was because of people on the ground that these changes happened. It isn't because the perpetrators suddenly develop a conscience and want to admit things. It's because they're forced, they have to. And so I'm really glad that people know some of that history, about what led to these changes, right?
Yes, absolutely. So what actions are you currently involved in, Kevin?
Well, a very important one happening right now is, for the last 4 months, there's been the International Common Law Court of Justice that you mentioned that found Pope Benedict guilty and forced him out of office. It reconvened in the fall on the west coast of Canada because of a lot of evidence of the ongoing genocide being perpetrated by the Chinese and traditional actors like the Canadian government, the Vatican, the churches of Canada. But this time, very much linked to the development of the COVID vaccine, which was first tested on Native children in Indian hospitals and communities all over the West Coast. So in effect, the mass murder of children allowed them to develop this vaccine. And under international law, it means it's not only a criminal body, but all of their products and their assets are forfeited, including those shots that they're now pushing on people. So it's a very important finding. The court is coming out this Saturday, January 15th, with its verdict. And we'll be sure to send all that to you. But you can see it online at that site you mentioned, murderbydecree.com. If you look at the link, it says ITCCS updates. There'll be the broadcast of that verdict and sentence and what it means. So it's a very important development, because once again, it's using common law to confront the ongoing genocide, not just the crimes of the past, but how that's playing out now, and so it's something everyone needs to know about.
Absolutely. And just to add to what you have said, when I was going to university, I graduated in 2004 from UVic. I took some very interesting courses. I sort of took all the fringe courses. I got my degree in social work, but I didn't specialize in any one field. I took whatever I wanted, which was a lot of anthropology and Canadian history and psychology and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, what they taught us right there was that after World War II, some of the Nazi scientists were imported to Canada and were allowed to do full experimentation on these First Nations children in the residential schools. I was horrified. And Kevin, I'm not sure the dates, but how long were the residential schools happening? And from my understanding, they had no choice. The children were taken from their families and forced into these schools. But it was close to 100 years, and it didn't end until what, the late 1980s?
1996 was the last one. It's all in the book, Murder by Decree, which you can get at Amazon, but also online, murderbydecree.com. All of the hard evidence. The schools, they're called schools, but they weren't. They were internment camps where half the children died, and over 100,000 children died in there over about a century, and that's a higher death rate than the death camps of Europe, the Black Death, all of that. So it's huge, but they call it the schools when they were, death camps really in practice. All of the children had to go there under the law if you're 7 years and older, and if you didn't, you'd go to jail. Just like today, if you're a Native person on a reservation, you refuse a shot or a medical treatment, you can go to jail. The COVID laws that are now applying to all of us were first tried out on Natives under the Indian Act for over 100 years in Canada. So people shouldn't be surprised these things are happening to all of us now. But the thing you first mentioned about the, I think it was the medical experiments, was it? Or remind me what you first mentioned.
Well, there's the whole Operation Paperclip thing that we don't need to get into.
The Nazis,
but
right.
There was Nazi scientists were imported to Canada. It's interesting. They wouldn't allow immigration of Jewish people, but the German Nazi scientists, and they were allowed to, and they did experiment on the children, innocent little children in these so-called residential schools.
Well, the reason that's being taught now in the universities is we first brought that out in the first tribunal we did that you mentioned in June 1998 in Vancouver. And more Nazis came to Canada after the war than any country in the world, because under Project Paperclip, they were brought in the back door through Canada into the US, given fake identities and that. A lot of the Nazis worked on the space program, but a lot of them, an equal number, worked on the CIA-funded MK Ultra mind control experiments, and which the Nazis had pioneered. Hospitals like the Nanaimo Indian Hospital, the R.W. Large Hospital, both run by the United Church, up in Bella Bella on the coast, the Charles Council Indian Hospital in Edmonton, the Lakehead Psychiatric Hospital, the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, they're all funded, heavily involved with, Nazi researchers. As a matter of fact, there's a white woman I met, Gail Perkins, and she was the sole survivor at the Lincoln Park Air Force Base in Calgary. In the mid-1950s, children were brought in there, both Native and white, and they were killed, all of them, in pain threshold experiments where they would torture them to see how much pain and pressure the human brain could take and then continue to operate. It was a military-connected, research. She saw the SS tattoos of doctors who were working on her. They later admitted, the government even admitted, that there was an ex-Nazi doctor who headed all of the program for all of Canada. So, I mean, this was really common. And the Indian hospitals and residential schools were a place where, like I mentioned, not just these torture experiments and mind control experiments, but the development of drug testing, including the COVID, all of the drugs that Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, Roche, all of these, Eli Lilly, they all have contracts with the churches, and they've had for decades, where they fund the theological schools that train the ministers. In return, the churches provide children for drug testing experiments that often kill these children. And that's why there's been such a huge smear and attack on me, because this is highlighting crimes today involving the very people pushing shots in the arms of children. The government's just working for Big Pharma. But Pfizer is one of the corporations that we indict and found guilty in that court case that's coming out on Saturday. So it's one of the ways we stop this, by taking people like Albert Bourla, the head of Pfizer, and literally arresting him and putting him in jail and deputizing police to do that. That's the way to stop these crimes, right?
Absolutely horrible. It's It's beyond imagination how horrible it really is, and how hidden. Because I myself, growing up, in white society, I mean, working class society, we were told nothing but lies about the First Nations people, nothing but lies. And all of this has been so hidden. And now it's coming out and coming out and coming out. And I was wondering if you want to talk a little bit about, you touched on it, but you want to talk a little bit more about how there's a connection to that, what happened in these residential schools, to what's going on to everybody today. It seems to me, and this is just my experience, not as a professional, but just as an ordinary person, but it seems to me that that the hardest being hit right now are the middle classes. If you've lived poor, if you've been friends with First Nations people and been exposed to the culture and stuff, you might know a little bit about this. But suddenly, this seems like this whole plan is now was practiced, I suppose, if you want to call it that, on these children and on the First Nations people, not just physically, the huge psychological operation that was put onto First Nations people, like probably since the 1700s. But now, all of a sudden, these people who thought they were kind of untouchable as Canadian citizens are experiencing similar, nothing here is bad, right? And they're freaking right out. But I want people to know this is the history of Canada is very dirty, very dark, and very dirty. And I just wondered if you want to touch a little bit on the connections between then and now.
There's direct connections, and it's so relevant. And kind of, the old saying, an injury to one is an injury to all. That's because if you let it happen to one person or one group, it'll happen to you next. Because these forces are insatiable, tyranny and, the profit motive to, develop all these things. It's insatiable. It keeps consuming the world and the people in it unless you draw a line and say no. So learning about this genocide now is life-saving, because if you don't know about it, it is happening to us now. Now, here's some examples. Everything happening now in the COVID police state was the law in Canada when it came to Indians. You couldn't leave a reservation without a special pass, like the COVID passport, with the vaccine passport. That's modeled on the green card you were given on the reservation for an Indian, all under the Indian Act. You can't refuse a shot or a medical treatment, or you go to jail. That's been the law in Canada since 1874 for Indians. I remember when I was a minister in Port Alberni, Native mothers would come to me and say, the Mounties came and just took my children away. And I resisted. And they stopped the vaccines they were experimenting on my kids with. They said they'd arrest me. So whenever they need to test out a new drug, you just go shove in the arm of an Indian child on a reservation. And if it kills them, there's no legal consequence, because Indians aren't citizens in Canada. They're wards of the state, which means you can kill them and there's no legal consequence. So they're a perfect test subject. Moving, controlling people's movements, forcing vaccines into them, and having no rights under the law like nobody does now. Who gives Trudeau or anybody, or Bonnie Henry, anyone, the right to say you can't assemble, you have to wear this? That's all assuming that people are slaves and they have no rights, and the rights can be taken away like an Indian on a reservation. So unfortunately, it's kind of poetic justice in a way that, all the people who are upset now about the vaccines and everything, none of them are with us when a few of us were standing outside the churches 20, 25 years ago and trying to bring this stuff out. They all ignored it. And yet now it's blowing back on them. So there's a lesson I hope people take from that we are now paying the price of something we all did to ourselves. We were part of that system. We profited from it. We paid the taxes. We put the money in the church collection plates that did all the crimes, so now this is a kind of justice, in that you have to go through these things yourself to really learn what you're part of, and then you can change it, but not when you're in a position of privilege. And I think that this is the silver lining of what's happening now with the COVID police state, is that now we're getting a rude awakening, what we're really part of, right?
Absolutely. We're all expendable crew members now. I think even the politicians and the health officials that are doing this, they think they're above it. Oh, no, no, no. They're going to get it too. And, our complicity, we have to pay for that. And I don't know if you want to call it karma or whatever, but I'm going to tell you, there's very few white people that I have met who give a shit, pardon my language, about First Nations people.
Yeah.
They don't care. They don't want to know. They're willfully ignorant. And the stories that were perpetuated when I was growing up is that First Nations people, oh, they're on their reserves and they have everything they need and tons of money and wonderful housing, and they just throw it all away, and all the terrible propaganda. But you know what? Me going to university, I didn't know any of it. Well, I did know some of this. My best friend in middle school, she was from Cardston, Alberta. Her name was Shirley Blood, and she was from the Blood Reserve. And she was my best friend, and she was always getting beat up by the white kids, and I was always defending her, and I get beat up too, but we were really close. But she was relocated to a Mormon family for reconditioning, which I thought was horrendous, a whole horrendous concept back then. But I never really found out what was going on until I went to university. So my eyes got really opened. And then, of course, I was a single mom and I was poor. And so I also had to do battle with social workers who constantly were threatening to take my kids away. But that's nothing, 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 because I've got white privilege, working class privilege to what's happened to our First Nations brothers and sisters. And so when this whole last two years, pardon my language, I get so angry, I call it a shitstorm because I don't see any other good word for it. I knew right away, I saw right away the parallels. And so I've been telling other people, and boy, they're slow to want to hear the message. They're slow to want to do anything. Everyone wants to stay in their comfort zone, and you can't stay in your comfort zone and be there for your brothers and sisters.
Well, there won't be a comfort zone after a while. And unfortunately, the way human beings are, they wait to the very last minute. And then when they suffer, then they want justice, then they want help. But the problem is, that old saying from Nazi Germany, first they came for so-and-so and I wasn't them. So then I did nothing. And then they took this group and I didn't do anything. Finally, they came for me and there was no one left to help me. That's exactly what's going on now. So yeah, the problem with all the protests over the COVID restrictions is that people are only looking at one little scale of the dragon. They're not looking at what's created it and how they're complicit in it. And until you do that, when you talked about how people dehumanize Native people, you always do that and you're conditioned by your culture. A genocidal culture always conditions its people to think like that of the group they're targeting. That way you won't care what happens to them because what's behind it all is big money. They had to do that to get the lands and resources. Who's doing it now to natives in BC? It's the Chinese. The first Native people, and I know because I worked for many years in the downtown east side of Vancouver, where we saw this happening. Native women's bodies were appearing without organs. They were missing organs, but that got swabbed out of the media and the court reports because the Chinese have been operating up in northern BC for over 20 years, terrorizing natives off the land to get the liquid natural gas. China pretty much owns Western Canada now, right? Trudeau even brought in a law allowing them to station troops in Canada. So, I mean, they're the ones really doing the, pardon me?
I'm sorry, to protect their assets, which is the resources.
It's all about the land and the resources like it always has been, but now it's China doing it. And, Trudeau's committed treason en masse. The very fact that he's still in office means the whole system is helping him commit treason. They're all aligned with China, just like the Vatican is. They're kind of shifting. China's a rising power in the world. So yeah, you dehumanize a group you want to wipe out, but that eventually blows back on everybody. And that's why this knowledge is so important to equip people to fight back. Otherwise, you're ignorant and you're got a blindfold on and you're led around in over a cliff, right?
I think there's another layer to this that I'm sure you're familiar with, but the viewers may not be. And that is, I think this whole sickness thing of the last 2 years is actually, although it's bad in itself, it's a cover for much larger crimes. Like, for instance, there is a global there's a global sex trade with children. They're using children. Well, they're using children for all kinds of things, and horrible, unspeakable things. And they're using children's body parts for cosmetic stuff to make them look younger, and it is horrible. And who are the majority of these children? They're children of color from all over the world, and they're being consumed. And this is being very much covered up. Kevin, do you want to talk a little bit about Queen Elizabeth? Because I've known about that for some time, and it's just unbelievable. There's this layer, this top layer of society that is, for lack of a better term, untouchable. Do you want to talk a little bit about Queen Elizabeth?
Yeah, well, one example of that is there was a man, William Coombs. He was a friend of ours, very active in our movement. He's a native man. He went through the death camps in Kamloops and Mission, run by the Catholic Church. When he was a young boy, he saw Queen Elizabeth show up with Prince Philip one day, October 10th, 1964, at the Kamloops School, where they, quote, discovered a mass grave recently. It was at that site. They went off on a picnic with the Queen and Prince Philip, and they watched as the couple took 10 children away, 7 boys and 3 girls, and they were never seen again. And police trained psychics came in and looked over the area and said, yeah, these children were all killed the same day in a ritual killing. Because the numbers all add up to 10. October 10th, 1964, 10 children. They were in Elizabeth and Philip were in Canada at that time. We've checked the records. And when William went public about that, he was to come to London to give a testimony about that. The Mounties showed up, dragged him down to St. Paul's Hospital. He was dead within 48 hours. And we have on record Chloe Kirker, who was the nurse at St. Paul's who treated him, last one to see him alive. The death certificate said tubercular meningitis. He had none of the symptoms of tuberculosis, but he had these discolored dark fingernails and other symptoms which come from arsenic poisoning. So they killed him in St. Paul's Hospital, February 26, 2011. And this happens when you're Native. I'd be dead if I was Native. I would have been killed long ago, but with somebody like me, you use character assassination, discrediting, smear campaigns. Otherwise, you create a martyr if they just kill me, right? So, but you can do it to somebody like William. And that's one of the reasons Elizabeth Windsor was found guilty, of genocide, because she made a personal role in it, not only as, quote, head of state responsible for all of these crimes, but, as an individual as well. So at that level of society, they use and kill children like that for the kicks, for the energy vampirism, however you want to see it. But it's, we can get more into that if you like. There's all these cults and things we've identified tied to the Vatican, various popes, all documented by eyewitnesses and even Vatican records making reference to this ninth circle cult that operates, But I mean, the criminal's in charge. So how are you going to confront it except by exposure and constant exposure, right?
Yeah, it's unbelievable, the kind of things that have been happening. Sorry for this question. It's just, the stuff is so huge. It's so big and it's so unknown and so hidden. And people just don't, would never imagine it in a million years. Kevin, can you talk a little bit more about the fact that First Nations people are not Canadian citizens? Because I think a lot of people, that would be brand new news to them. And, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, all they have to do is read the Indian Act, which is still the law in Canada. It was brought in 1874. And it says that if you're living on reservation, which you have to get the government benefits, it's a catch-22. You can live off, but then you starve on the street in many cases. if you're Native, because the standard of living among Natives now is as bad as it was 100 years ago. It's never really changed, including TB levels and all of that. But anyway, if you're on reservation, you're not a citizen, you're what's called a ward of the crown, which means you're like a child under the law. You can't even open a bank account without government approval. And so what that is genocidal legislation that's been banned by international law. It's why the apartheid South African regime was boycotted by so many countries, because you can't have race-based legislation. You can't have like an Italian act, an Irish act, targeting a particular group, but you can have an Indian act, right? And even the notion Indian is a racist concept, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that kind of racial profiling and targeting is.
Oh, you just cut out, Kevin. Your voice, Kevin,
is a part of the legal structure of genocide.
Can you repeat that? Because you just cut out, and we couldn't hear what you were saying.
Okay, the targeting of a particular group by legislation is an important aspect of any genocidal regime. It's proof that genocide is going on. Routinely, police will murder young Native people, or just shoot them on the street. There's never any consequence legally. The police aren't even reprimanded because they know they don't have legal standing. Natives are just like a non-person. And it's always been that way, so that's something that Canadians don't want to look at, because then they realize their own complicity in it. And if you don't want to believe something, you just deny it. It's the most common response among people to deny something, right? So you don't have to think about it.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I think somewhere between 30 and 40 different I don't know if we call them reserves or reservations in Canada, don't have drinkable water, don't have clean water. If that was any white community, it wouldn't happen. So yeah, you're right. And the other thing too, I think that a lot of people don't realize is that the extermination of First Nations people has been legislated almost right from the get-go. So, when the white people or French or Spanish or whatever came to Canada, they wouldn't have survived. Well, it wasn't Canada then. I don't even know if it's Canada now. It's probably a corporation. But they wouldn't have survived one day if it wasn't for our First Nations brothers and sisters. They were taught how to survive, how to do things. And then, of course, that the other aspect to this a lot of people don't know is the Hudson's Bay Company completely destabilized the economy. So before the settlers came, there were huge amounts of First Nations people. They were healthy. They had their own politics sorted out. There was trade, there was commerce, there was everything. And so what happened is very soon after, I guess they learned everything, I'm talking about the settlers learned from the First Nations people, then they went about extermination. And some of the earlier prime ministers of Canada were very outspoken that they weren't going to stop until every last one was dead. Do you have anything?
Oh yeah, you should look in murderbydecree.com. I have quotes from early politicians. Give you an example from British Columbia. There was an Anglican missionary called John Sheepshanks, and he was a shareholder in what was called the Puget Sound Agricultural Company, owned by the Hudson's Bay. And this PSAC company would what they call preempt land, even though there were a lot of Chilcotin. To give you an example, the interior Chilcotin around what's now Quesnel. There were thousands of them living up there, but the Puget Sound Company preempted the land and bought it all up, knowing they were about to all be wiped out. Well, they sent their shareholder, John Sheepshanks, the Anglican missionary, up among them, and he kept a record in the summer of 1864 of all the children he forcibly inoculated, vaccines again. Within 2 months, 90% of them were dead from smallpox. And then PSAC preempted the land and they all moved in. This John Sheepshanks went on to become the Bishop of Norwich and got a seat in the House of Lords. And he died, in his bed in 1909, being rewarded for committing genocide. That's on the public record. That's in the library system. It's all there. That the early, the people who Vancouver streets are named after, like Helmeken, he says, or Seymour, he was the first governor or lieutenant governor, he said, we'll have to employ the Colorado solution and get every white man to kill every Indian in this province. You know, they would openly talk about this massacre, right? But then they fog all that history and they insert their own history, you know, that we didn't know that you know, smallpox and TB was going to kill Indians. Well, that's nonsense, because they, you know, that's why they knew they had to vaccinate themselves against some of the smallpox. But of course, among Indians, that, like alcohol, it has a different effect on their blood chemistry, and they knew it. So you put that in one of them, it'll spread and kill them all. They knew it. You know, in the residential schools, Dr. Peter Bryce, he went to study the Western residential schools in 1909. He said, direct quote, "The conditions are being deliberately created to spread infectious diseases. This is a national crime. Over half the children are dying," because they would regularly, decade after decade, the Catholic, the Anglican, the United Churches had a policy of taking the healthy children, locking them in with the sick who were dying of TB and smallpox, then never treating them, never feeding them. They all die off en masse. That's why I had over half of them die. That was planned germ warfare done by every level of the church, the courts, the government, the police, right up to 1996. And yet the perpetrators then create their Truth and Reconciliation Commission in response to what we were bringing out. It's appointed by the very churches that did the crime, the TRC commissioners. And they come up with the Holocaust denying statement that only about 1% to 2% of the children died, when their own records show half died. Their own records in this can show half the children died every year. Yet they can lie openly and say it was only 1% or 2% because they're in charge. They get to write the history, and you know, I mean, this is not surprising. It's what happens in a genocidal regime. If the Nazis had won World War II, what do you think they would have said about all the missing people? They would have said, oh, they just kind of vanished somewhere. They wouldn't have admitted the death camps. They would have called the death camps something else, pretty name, right? Just like we do, you know, residential
summer
schools.
vacation spot or something like that.
Right, sure. Yeah, so I mean, that's the way genocide works, but we don't realize we're part of it until now, right? You know, it's hitting all of us.
We absolutely are. Do you want to just speak a little bit to the alcohol? Because one of the slurs that is very common is that, you know, First Nations people can't hold their liquor and it's their own fault that they have these problems. And it's horrible. And I know it's not true, but there was a deliberate attempt, was there not, to introduce alcohol to weaken the structure and the communities of the people?
Not just alcohol, there was germ warfare, like I mentioned, but also it was a policy, and we got this from government documents, eyewitness testimonies, and Native and whites describing how it was a law that you couldn't pay an Indian if they were your domestic servant. You couldn't pay them money. You paid them in alcohol. The Mounties would come and dump whiskey crates right on the beach outside the reservations, just all this free alcohol. Now, the blood chemistry among Asiatic derived people, including indigenous people in North America, is they have very low tolerance for alcohol, and it destroys your liver much quicker. For example, when I was a street minister and in Port Alberni, I constantly would be doing funerals of young guys in their 30s and 40s dying of diabetes or liver failure, or kidney failure, right? Direct result. It's why you destroy the diet, you destroy the immune system. You know, and so it's medical genocide, biological genocide. And so naturally you have to create a whole excuse for that by saying, well, it's just that they can't hold, you know, just that they're somehow morally bankrupt and beat their children more often, or, you know, what you say about blacks or Jews or whatever target group you want to target, right?
Now, quickly, our time is starting to run out, but I was wondering, Kevin, if you could tell the viewers a little bit about, I understand you're being targeted right now, and do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because of course the powers that be don't want this information to become common knowledge, because a lot of people would wake up to what's going on today and for other reasons. But do you want to speak a little bit about what's going on there for you?
Well, I've been targeted since I was first fired by the United Church in January 1995. They destroyed my family. They took my kids, permanently blacklisted me, stopped me from retraining at UBC, destroyed my PhD program, went to every employer I ever tried, like the Unitarian Church, and destroy my application there. It's been a constant. They've done everything short of killing me. But recently what's happened over the last couple of years with the COVID thing, as you mentioned, we've been forming republic assemblies that pass their own laws that say no longer are we part of this genocidal crown jurisdiction. We've told the police to stand down. We've got these assemblies to issue our own local laws saying the COVID measures are banned. In other words, we're taking power back. We're not protesting. We're not asking for anything. We're recreating a new nation, the Republic of Canada. And they're the ones who sponsored this recent court case whose verdict is coming down on Saturday. So we're a separate power. Now, as a result of that, I've been severely targeted. I experienced chemical attacks on 2 occasions in the summer and fall of 2021. Almost died from it. I had to go on heavy antibiotics, and that caused a major kidney stone, quite large in my left kidney. And it's often the result of heavy antibiotic use, but also for other reasons, other attacks. And so the difficulty is when our people tend to go into the hospital, they die. We've had 4 Native people die in hospital, like William Coombs, who I mentioned. So it's not safe for me to go in and have surgery, and yet it's needed. So, they try to back you into corners that way, and that way they can kill you, and it doesn't look like killing. Oh, he just had an unfortunate incident in the hospital, right? That's what they're trying to set up. And, it's what they, kind of a legal form of murder. So what we're doing is we've gone very public about that. A lot of people are donating resources and funds to help me. We're going to be having legal documents served on any doctor who performs a surgery. They're going to be human rights observers right in the operating room, hopefully, and people outside the hospital. So we're going to bring a lot of light on this for protection, because right now, I've been crucial to this development of this whole movement and this campaign that's brought down popes. And, we have to protect that history and that knowledge and that movement. Otherwise, we're all, the lives of all of us are at stake. And so that's kind of the more recent stuff. But we post all our updates, murderbydecree.com under ITCC updates, and republicofcanada.ca under breaking news. You can see everything there. You can also write to me, angelfire101@protonmail.com.
Wonderful. I was going to ask you where, obviously your website, and the links are going to be below. Is there anything else you want to say to folks just in conclusion today? And thank you so much for taking the chance and taking the risk, and and even being on the show with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, it has to happen. Lives of children are at stake. I realized that when they took everything from me, in a way, what do I have left to lose, right? It's a sign that you're under the right tech when when they go after you like that. But I would want to say to people that recognizing that we shouldn't fear when bad things happen to us, because it's how we learn what we're really part of. It's how we get stronger and more courageous. And you just can't give up. You got to stop thinking in terms of what might happen to me if I do something, as turn that around and say, what's going to happen to the child if I don't do something? What's going to happen to my family and people I love and others? So it's when you develop that resolve and realize you're in this for the long haul, it's not going to be something that changes overnight. This is a long-term reorientation of our life's values and purpose. But you learn that as you go. I didn't learn that overnight. I made a lot of mistakes, but that's how you learn. And I would say, look at more of my books at murderbydecree.com, especially like the Common Law Training Manual, the Case for the Republic of Canada, the Whistleblower Manual. All of that's earned from hard experience. And, I'm very much kind of a tutor now to people who are learning now really what they're part of. And I would just say to people, it's up to each one of us to do this. There aren't heroes in this. We're all our own hero once you take the step to take on this murderous system.
And I think, too, it helps us to have our personal self-development so that we can become the kind of human beings that can live in peace and love and harmony. One other thing before I let you go is, are you able to take donations to help with those medical expenses and other expenses that go along with the work that you do?
Yes. The simplest way is to write to me, angelfire101@protonmail.com. We'll send you all the information how to do that. In Canada, you can do an e-transfer, and you write to an email, herewestand1517@gmail.com. Guy's name is Kieran Buchanan. He's handling all the e-donations. You can also do wire transfers and send checks, but that information we can send you if you write to us.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Kevin, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. I know this has been disturbing information, but it's important for people to wake up and understand the history, the true history of what's been going on in Canada. Everybody thinks Canada's the top hat to the United States. Wow, you know, the stuff I've been exposing on different shows has really woke a lot of people up. They're just shocked. And even Canadians, you know, there are some Canadians who want to remain willfully ignorant, but most Canadians, when they start to hear this, then they start to wake up. And then waking up is going to cause us to then provide protection for all of us. All of us. And the nonsense has to stop. It has to stop. When's it going to stop? When we say it's time to stop. We're not going to participate, and we're not going to keep this a secret. So thank you very, very much for being on the Quantum Guide Show. Hope to have you back, maybe with an update. When you have some information you want to share, just let me know. It would be great to have you on again.
Yep. This Saturday, urge people as well, this Saturday to go to murderbydecree.com under ITCCS updates. You'll see the broadcast of the verdict and sentence of the common law court. And then the next day on my show, and I should mention this, I do a blog show on Sundays, 3 p.m. Pacific, bbsradio.com/herewestand. And we'll be talking about the verdict. So that's every Sunday at 3, but especially this Sunday. And thank you, Karen. I appreciate it. And I know we'll talk again soon.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on the Quantum Guide Show. And I'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us for the Quantum Guide Show. Become the change you wish to see in the world. Subscribe to Karen's YouTube channel, click the like button, and share this show with your friends. Check out Karen's website at KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com. All the links are available in the description box below. Until the next time, keep up the good work.
Surrendering to endlessness puts all my inner strife to rest. For time gives birth to hurriedness. It all makes sense, well, more or less. And the sages put me to their test. With heart and soul to do my best to find the answers to my quest. I wonder and I must confess, I don't